Hello. I just downloaded OBS with the prospects of maybe live streaming, and recording video segments for my podcast, formerly known as Jabber and the Drone, currently known as the MacGuffin Podcast, sort of the second relaunch of the MacGuffin Podcast, a website I've been writing for a long time. So this is basically just a test run. This is to see how the software works. I think I have it all tuned to the settings that I like and all of that stuff. We're just going to make a dumb tier list video. And if I decide I like it, then I will upload it to YouTube and we'll have content for the first time in 5+ years or whatever it's been. So this specific tier list, music related, although the podcast I do is movie related, but whatever. So I just looked up something fun on tiermaker.com and found 90s, 2000s, and 2010s alternative/rock tier list. This is probably the music I'm the most familiar with, so and what I've been listening to most of my life. So I should have a good salty opinion on most of this stuff down here. If I don't, it's going to have to go into this bottom category here. So the categories are what would normally be called S tier is the absolute best, legendary, great, pretty good, okay, meh, and I have the guts to call them bad, and haven't listened to. So, and there's, a few bands here. So I'm kind of looking around. I'm pretty familiar with most of this, but we'll just take it one at a time. And hopefully this is entertaining in any kind of way. All right, Three Doors Down. I definitely have the guts to call them bad. No, you're not meh. You're less than meh. So the Superman song, right? The Kryptonite, that was a big deal when I was in early high school in the early 2000s. Played on the radio constantly. It's an okay song, but wore out its welcome pretty fast, and they have produced nothing of value since then, and were famously, if they're famous for anything at this point, the only band that was willing to play Donald Trump's inauguration. So they suck. Alice in Chains. All right. Okay. Ooh, this is kind of interesting. So Alice in Chains, it's going to end up being a long video. Alice in Chains is, at a point in time, my favorite band when I was in high school. About the same time I was not liking Three Doors Down that much. I was obsessed with Alice in Chains and anything kind of early 90s Seattle, grunge, whatever. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of like grown out of them a little bit. I still think some of their songs are cool, some of their albums are cool or whatever. I don't think they're a bad band by any means, but like some of the stuff that I thought was just like so dark and so important or whatever now kind of rings as a little corny and melodramatic. But the super influential, there's so many bands coming out right now that like rip them straight off. I'm going to put them under pretty good. Pretty good. I know a lot of people would rank them higher than that, but that's where they are for me right now. And this is a personal list, I guess. All-time low, I don't super know them that much. I'm going to go ahead and put them in haven't really listened to. I think they're a pop-punk band, kind of a Warped Tour-y 2000s pop-punk band. That's never been my scene. I've never really cared for that music, so I doubt I'd like them if I heard them, but if I'm wrong, if this video ends up going up on YouTube, go ahead and tell me. Arcade Fire, another band I was obsessed with at a point in time. Loved their first two albums a lot in college. Really caught that wave of like indie rock going mainstream. In retrospect, now people kind of think of them as sort of like silly and self-serious. They were one of those like Canadian bands that had 1,000 members. There was a lot of that going on back then. And their like latter few albums have been less exciting. Nobody really cares anymore. I'm gonna go ahead and put them right up there with Alice in Chains. Um, yeah, they've been able to maintain that momentum. We'd maybe be talking, but right now they're just kind of a product of the 2000s. Arctic Monkeys. I'm gonna throw them in. I'm gonna. To me, that's like right over here. If I could put it in between, I would. I'm gonna put them in meh. I've never really understood the big deal about Arctic Monkeys. They were like kind of a British garage rock thing. You know, as I was getting into all that kind of music, they always missed me. I just never heard a song by them that inspired me to buy a record. Beck. Guess I couldn't find a logo for Beck. Beck, I'm gonna put in great. Dude's been around forever, since the early 90s, and he has maintained relevance pretty much all the way since then. Peaks and valleys for sure, but you can pretty much find a great album. About every 3 albums he puts out is a really good one. And I haven't kept up totally since like I don't know, Sea Change or somewhere around there. But he's won Grammys since then. Not that that really means anything. Blink 182. This might be controversial, but I don't like Blink 182 that much. Maybe that makes me a traitor to my generation, but as I've said, I'm not a huge pop punk fan. I think a lot of this music is super annoying, and I would say that all the bands that are especially influenced by Blink 182 are the bands that annoy me the most. But they're really influential, and I'm a big fan of like punk music, like modern punk music, hardcore, things like that. And it's undeniable that they were a gateway band for a lot of the bands I love. Some of the bands who are younger than I am, who've come out in the last 10 years or so, cite Blink 182 as like their first big punk band that they've enjoyed. Even though I think they're making better music than Blink 182 now. But I'm going to put them in okay because of that. Like, I get it. But I don't really particularly like any of their music. Bush. Bush were one of the more prominent post-grunge bands in the mid-90s. Had a lot of hits at a point in time. I can't say they've maintained a lot of relevance past the 90s, other than Gavin Rossdale was at one point married to Gwen Stefani, who, up until they divorced, ended up much more famous than Gavin Rossdale. But if Glycerin's on the radio, you're probably going to turn it up and sing along, even if you're embarrassed to say so. I'm going to throw them in okay. They're higher up on the list. Like, if we're going granular, they're higher up for me than Blink 182 because I would actually listen to their music willingly. But whatever. They're a 90s thing and they're pretty much kind of just remain that way. I don't know what this is. Cage the Elephant. I only know one song from them. That, what's the title of that song? Ain't No Something for the Wicked. You know which one. The only one, as far as I know. I thought it sounded like a White Stripes ripoff when it came out. I don't, if the song's on the radio, I'm not mad at it, but I don't really care. I think they were kind of forgettable. I'm going to throw them in meh. Coldplay. This is a band that a lot of people really hate. They kind of caught that like, U2 hatred. Like when everyone used to hate U2 for being too self-serious and self-important and kind of bland. Coldplay sort of graduated to that. I don't hate them as much as other people do. I actually really like their first 3 albums. I think Parachutes is really good. The one after that, which name I forgot, had clocks and stuff on it. I sort of lost track around like album 4 or so. And these days are kind of just a big commercial product. But, they write some okay songs for like contemporary adult music that's on the radio. I'm not going to throw them in great. Oh, I'll put them. I'll put them in pretty good. Death Cab for Cutie, another band I shouldn't say that another band that I liked or was obsessed with, because that's probably at least half of this list at some point. No, they're great, and they had a really long run there of great albums, and even their like less than great albums are still very listenable. They were kind of interesting at the time because they sort of straddled that line between NPR and Starbucks CD rack indie rock, and the sort of like Warped Tour emo scene in the early 2000s. They sort of straddled that line. They had fan bases in both, and I don't think they were trying to do anything. I just think that's the sound they sort of happened upon. But there's at least 4+ albums by them that I like a lot. They're not legendary. I'm gonna put them in great. Pretty good. Man, nothing's cracking these top two. I'm really like being maybe a little too judicious about this. Evanescence, don't really care. I think this is like Babby's first goth band, with like obnoxious nu metal elements. They were on the same label as Creed, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Amy Lee had a decent singing voice. I'm gonna throw it in meh. They don't offend me, but I just don't really care. Fall Out Boy, probably one of, if not the biggest band to come out of this like 2000s emo era. Again, not a big pop punk fan. Wasn't into Fall Out Boy. Never really was. Found their music to be pretty obnoxious most of the time. I'm going to throw that in... I'm going to throw that in bad. I have enough guts to call them bad. They're hugely famous and they're millionaires now. And some of the guys are actually like legit in the punk and hardcore scene before they were in Fall Out Boy, or even concurrently. Their drummer plays for a really sick band called Race Trader, and it sounds nothing like Fall Out Boy. So I would suggest that anybody who likes heavy music to check out Race Trader, but I don't care about Fall Out Boy. Florence and the Machine, they were kind of past my time. I was sort of done with that style of indie rock by the time they got big. So I couldn't even tell you a single song from them. I know they're big now. Foo Fighters. How many bad albums does it take to delete the good ones? Foo Fighters was great until about album number 5 or so, and then they turned into full-on dad rock. But their 90s stuff is pretty much unimpeachable. I still really dig those first 3 albums. Album 4 is okay. They lost me around album 5. And have yet to really return. I'll watch any interview with Dave Grohl because he's a funny guy. But and he seems like a good dude, and I value his opinion. But have not really liked a Foo Fighters song in a long time. I'm going to throw them in pretty good. Had they have broken up after album 4, they might have even been up in the great or legendary status. But as it stands right now, pretty good. Franz Ferdinand, they had the moment. This is when everybody wanted to sound like they were on Rough Trade Records or something. Everybody wanted to sound like, I don't know, they were like a cross between Dexy's Midnight Runners and Gang of Four. But not really as substantive as either. I really liked that first album. It was fun at the time. I don't know how well it really holds up. I'm going to throw that in okay. It's okay. Gorillaz. They're one of those bands that I've always liked the songs, like when they're on the radio or people are playing them at a party or, a house setting or something like that. Totally dig them, totally dig what they're about, but never did the deep dive into the albums. So, for me, I'm going to put in pretty good. People say Demon Days is a great album, so maybe that's where I would start if I were to. But to me, I was just totally comfortable with them being a band I like whenever they happen upon me. Green Day, sort of in the Foo Fighters camp of really good first few albums and some really terrible more recent ones. And so because of that, I'm putting them in the same category. Green Day is slightly more important than the Foo Fighters in some regards, though, because they were really pioneers of like the pop punk thing. A lot of bands wouldn't exist if it weren't for Green Day. Really kind of broke barriers as far as what punk bands could achieve commercially. They definitely invented that whole they didn't invent it. That's apocryphal, but they popularized that whole SoCal, between them and Offspring and NoFX and a few other bands from that time period. They sort of popularized that SoCal aesthetic, even though they're from Northern California. But that sort of skater appeal. I'm going to keep them in pretty good, even though they maybe overall deserve to be great, just for their 90s output. But those last few albums are really wretched, and they did a fucking Broadway musical. Okay, Incubus. Big band in the early 2000s. I don't think their sound really holds up. It dates pretty badly now. A lot of funky, groovy kind of guitar stuff. Little bit of nu metal, a little bit of rapping going on there. Not as bad as some bands. DJ scratching and that kind of stuff. Music that really could only exist when it came out. But some of those songs are still jams. They're going to go in pretty good too. I feel like this is where a lot of bands are going to end up, is right here in the middle. Jane's Addiction. I'm surprised this even made the list. Jane's Addiction is kind of an old person's band now. I think, they haven't been famous for a long time. They had their moment. It was called the 90s. I'm going to throw them in great. I've never been personally a huge Jane's Addiction fan. I've appreciated them. But undeniably influential. Perry Farrell set up the whole Lollapalooza thing and, got a lot of bands' attention because of it. And they were unique and weird and had their own sound and their own aesthetic that was unique to them. And even if I wasn't specifically into it, they were doing their own thing. Jimmy Eat World. This might surprise some people given where I've rated some of this stuff. But Jimmy Eat World is one of my favorite bands ever. And I can't say that I've loved their last 5 albums or so. The last one was actually kind of decent for what it is. But their first 4 albums are some of my favorite music ever. And I listen to them all the time. I'm going to throw it in great. They're not quite legendary status because I think they're sort of there's 2 camps of Jimmy Eat World fans. The people who love the hits and remember it from when they were in high school and are happy to play it if it comes on the radio. And then there's people like me who are obsessed and will talk your ear off about them in the early 90s touring with Midwest emo bands and that kind of stuff. So they have an interesting place in music history, more interesting than most people know. But I'm going to keep them in great. Kasabian. I'm surprised this is on the list because they are so almost one-hit wonders. I'm going to throw them with Franz Ferdinand. They're in the same league. They're okay. They had one good album. It's a very good album. You know what? I'll bring him up to pretty good, because that one album is like front to back great. But after that, I kind of lost interest. I don't really care anymore. Keen. They were one of many kind of like not very interesting Radiohead ripoffs that came out in the 2000s. I don't even really remember what their biggest hit was now. I'm going to throw them in meh. Kings of Leon. They're pretty cool. They were a thing. Guitar band. Kind of bluesy. Yeah, they were kind of like in that White Stripes, Black Keys world of like bluesy, garagey type stuff. I never fully jumped on board with the Kings of Leon thing, but I always liked their music. I will throw it in pretty good. Linkin Park. A very important band to a lot of people, but totally missed me. To me, they're like everything I said about Incubus, like kind of embarrassing production choices that are very specific to their time and place of the early 2000s. Kind of new metal nonsense. Some very bad rapping. Never really cared for Chester's voice. I don't mind his like soft singing voice, but when he tries to go like metal or whatever and he gets really screechy, he's very annoying to me. I thought the lyrics were kind of like, I mean, R.I.P. because I guess he was really depressed and stuff, but at the time I thought it was like bad teenage MySpace poetry. I'm throwing it in meh. I think they had one song I kind of liked that came off the Meteora album, but basically I never cared. Lord. I am Lord. Lord, Lord, Lord. I don't know. I don't really... She had the one song. It was on the radio. I didn't mind it. I'm going to throw it in okay. MCR. My Chemical Romance. Now, this is a band I sort of misjudged. You know, usually my opinions are pretty set in stone for the most part. They wiggle a little bit, but not much. But this band, I've definitely kind of turned the corner on. I really misjudged them when I was in high school. I thought they were just another Warped Tour emo band with lots of, you know, black fingernail polish and makeup and guy liner. And I sort of wrote them off as being, you know, teeny bopper stuff and didn't really care about their music, didn't buy any of the albums, and like actively campaigned against them. But then when I got older and Gerard Way like showed that he was like more of a creative person with, you know, his work in comic books and that kind of stuff, and he did the solo album, The Hesitant Alien, which I really liked a lot of the singles off of that and ended up buying the CD, at which point I went back and listened to My Chemical Romance after they were already broken up, and I realized, like, you know what? They were kind of like a cut above the rest. Even for that era of that style of music, they were better than most. And most of their songwriting was infinitely better than a lot of their peers at the time. So I'm actually going to throw them in great. I'm not a super fan. I probably wouldn't have to go see them in a stadium or anything like that, but I get it. I get it now. MGMT. I had the one album everyone cares about. They were a thing in the middle of the 2000s. You know, they were an indie rock. They came out during that whole like popularization of indie rock thing, but they had sort of like a 70s glitter rock appeal, and they acted like rock stars and talked about drugs and stuff that wasn't cool in the indie world. I think their egos, kind of like Kasabian, their egos were bigger than their actual impact. I'm going to throw them in okay. I like some of the songs, but, you know, they're not as cool as I think they are. What is this? I think this is Modest Mouse, but I've never seen them use this logo before. I was obsessed, literally obsessed with Modest Mouse. At a point in time, they were my favorite band. Haven't really cared for anything since Good News. They haven't released a lot since Good News. But there's definitely sort of a part one and part two of their career. And I prefer part one. Their latter music has been kind of obnoxious to me, but I mean, I will listen to those first 5 or so albums easily. So I'm going to throw them in great. Is anything break to up here? We're getting to the more important bands eventually. This is a long video already. Mumford & Sons. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit I sort of went through a Mumford & Sons phase like everyone else did around the same time. And then once I got out of that phase, I was like, woo, what was that about? You know, I don't know. They're okay. They're okay, I guess. For that, like, mid-2000s jug music. Muse is a band I think is highly overrated. I never understood why everyone was obsessed with this band. I thought they were sort of a blatant Radiohead ripoff. They had some theatrics, a little kind of Queen-esque at times, but yeah, I never understood what the big deal about this band was, and how they gained the notoriety they got. Yeah, they're kind of over here in the okay category. Okay, do you really have to say? I mean, and I'm not just throwing them there to be like edgelord, you know, internet guy who has to make a meme joke out of Nickelback. I mean, they really are that bad. They're just, I don't think their music like ruins the world or anything like some people pretend they are. They're just very mediocre. Oh, I put them in haven't listened to. They're just very mediocre. And have never written anything interesting in their lives. Nirvana. Here we go. First one to crack the legendary list. There's something above that, isn't there? The absolute best. Would I go so far as to call them that? I don't know. Maybe I'll reconfigure some of this when I'm done. But it's Nirvana. I mean, and I'm not just saying that because they're Nirvana. I think they're genuinely an interesting band. I think the way that they sort of like brought together alternative rock with punk rock, with hardcore, with noise music, with classic rock, garage music, like the way they synthesize all that in this sort of naive, simplistic way. There's a reason why people still listen to Nirvana. You can throw on a Nirvana record. Like, those albums could have come out this year. There are bands that are putting out that style of music again. And Nirvana would fit right in with like a Run for Coverage Records kind of band. Oasis. They're good. Oasis is good. I don't think they're as good as they think they are, and I don't think they're as good as some of their fans think they are. But they're pretty good. One Republic. Literally never even heard of this band before. They definitely were past my time. What is this? I want to say, is this 21 Pilots? I can't see. I think it's 21 Pilots. I don't know. I'm gonna do this. Let's see. Oh no, this is Panic at the Disco. Okay, you can stop now. You can stop now. Um, Panic at the Disco was like a more annoying version of Fall Out Boy, so they go in the same category. Don't care. This, I don't know what this is. Is this Marilyn Manson, maybe? I can't tell what that is, so I'm going to throw this in the I don't know category. Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam's good. Pearl Jam's good, and they are dangerously close to being dad rock at this point, and some people might say that they are. But if you actually like listen to the records, if you actually like watch them play live, and maybe not in person, but even just on video, they're still amazing. Like, Pearl Jam has done what they do perfectly since their inception. And I'm not even like a Pearl Jam stan. Like, I like the records, but when I actually like watch them play and stuff, it's just you have to give it to them. They're just that good. I'm gonna throw them in legendary. I am. They've been around forever. They're the last like grunge band left now, even though they haven't really been playing grunge music since the 90s, but you know, they're the last living band from that era, and they're great. Queens of the Stone Age, I'm going to put in the great category. Also, incredible live band, across the board, great albums. You know, some I like more than others, but basically they've always been very consistent, really cool style, very, very locked in on their aesthetic. I've never, you know, tried something, you know, stepped out of bounds too much or tried something experimental in a way that backfired on them. I mean, they're great. Radiohead. This might annoy some people because I think they're not very cool to like right now. But I'm throwing them in legendary. Haven't really listened to the last two albums all that much. I sort of like stepped off the Radiohead train, but like from the Bends all the way to at least In Rainbows, pretty much unimpeachable. Always pushing themselves forward, always trying new stuff, experimenting in ways that do pan out. Top-notch musicians, great songwriters, experimental yet very accessible. I mean, you know, they're Radiohead. R.E.M. R.E.M. lasted a bit too long for their own career. They, if they had broken up around 1994, they would have been perfect. And I'm actually going to throw them into the great status. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to throw them in legendary, and only for this reason. They were one of the first bands to do what they did. They pretty much invented American indie rock in the way that we think of it today. Like those first few records on IRS, and then like the way that they advanced their career into a commercial success, and like, you know, they always did exactly what they wanted to do. They didn't always, what they wanted to do wasn't always terribly interesting, but you know, they always were working from a place of integrity. Red Hot Chili Peppers, probably my favorite band when I was in middle school. Definitely went through a phase. I don't hate them as much as people like to hate them now, but I do kind of get the meme. You know what? They were really early on too. Like, people like to joke, but they were pushing envelopes back in the early 80s. In like 84, 85, nobody was really doing what they did. And I'm going to put them in great. Soundgarden. See, now we're getting to like everything is going to be sort of above pretty good, probably. I'm going to throw Soundgarden into the legendary section over here with Pearl Jam and Nirvana. They were the oldest of the grunge bands from Seattle, the ones that got really big. And all of their music is pretty much great. The last record, the like reunion records, not the best, but still pretty decent. And like that early stuff is just insane. Sum 41. No thanks. Tame Impala, kind of along with Florence and the Machines, past my time. They got big when I was listening to other stuff. Can't really say that I know what they're about. I don't think I care that much. The 1975, I vaguely remember them. Again, never really caught me. I'm going to put them in okay because I think there was a point in time when their songs were being played on like Fuse or whatever, and they were like okay, they were an okay band, but I don't super remember them. The Black Keys. I'm going to put them in pretty good. They were a little past my time. They got big when I was stopped paying attention to that style of music, but they seem like cool dudes. I get what they're about. Like they sort of like they came in and like after that garage rock revival thing sort of ended, they sort of like picked up whatever steam was left from that and kept it going. And they seemed like a cool band. The Cure, I would call them more of a 80s band than anything else, but yeah, I guess they made records in the 90s and 2000s. Are they going to be the first one to make it to absolute best? I'm going to throw them in legendary. You know what? I'm going to shift some stuff around a little bit. I think if there is this category that exists, it should be for Nirvana and The Cure. These are two bands that are insanely influential. And yeah, that's all I'll say about them. The Killers, I never really cared for the Killers that much. They're not the worst, but they're definitely not the best. I thought they were kind of annoying. I'm going to throw them in meh. The Cooks. Same difference. Meh. The Offspring. Really liked them in high school. And then I like popped in their CDs when I got a little bit older and I realized how much I'd grown out of them. They have some jams, but they definitely don't age as well as a lot of their contemporaries. The Strokes. The Strokes are interesting because they put out two of the best records from their time period in the early 2000s. And like kicked off that whole like garage rock revival, post-punk revival thing. And like defined that whole like Brooklyn aesthetic in the early 2000s. And then everyone's just kind of been waiting for them to get back to that again. They keep releasing albums that are like subpar and not very good. But everyone is like it's like Weezer. Like everyone keeps wanting them to release the next Pinkerton, but the reality is they're just not that band anymore. And so they deceive themselves in thinking they like their new stuff when reality is their new stuff is just not very good. But those first few records are fucking great. So I'm going to put them in great. I think this is the XX. They didn't really catch me. I don't know what they're about really. 30 Seconds to Mars was Jared Leto's vanity project that I didn't give a shit about. 3 Days Grace were pretty lame. Here's 21 Pilots. Probably the biggest band going right now. And I'm just going to... They're too out of my generation. I just don't get it. You know, I've listened to some of the songs are like catchy or whatever. To me, it's barely rock music, let alone alternative music. To me, you remember that band Gym Class Heroes? They sampled Supertramp. To me, 21 Pilots sounds like a slightly updated version of like Gym Class Heroes and Flowbots and like that kind of stuff, like this one-hit wondery stuff from like 2007. Like 21 Pilots would have fit really perfectly like there around the era of like fucking Starship Cobra or Cobra Starship or whatever they were called. I'm not going to call them bad. I just don't really get it. I'll put them in meh. All right, here we go. Vampire Weekend. Really liked the first 3 albums. Haven't really listened to the last one. Really liked those first 3, though. I'm going to put them in pretty good. Because as much as I like them, you know, they're kind of shooting for the moon and reaching it. So they're exactly as good as they want to be, which is pretty good. Weezer, you just heard me talk about them in conjunction with the Strokes. They're another one of those started strong. Everybody loves the Blue Album. A lot of people love Pinkerton. There's kind of a cult for just those 2 albums alone. The prevailing wisdom is that they lost their way after that point. I think I like Green Album okay. That was my first Weezer album. Maladroit has a few good songs on it. All their albums have like 2 or 3 great songs and then a lot of whatever. Ever since Pinkerton anyway. Those are like Pinkerton and the Blue Album and are pretty much the only 2 albums where they're like solidly front to back good. But I feel like if they would just whittle down their records and just only release 5 or 6 of their best songs at a time, people would think about them a lot more fondly than they do now. Because of that, I'm gonna throw them in pretty good. The White Stripes. For a little while there, the White Stripes were the last band that really mattered. I think they superseded the garage rock revival. I think Jack Black has become sort of a Prince-like figure of his era, in that he's this like songwriter, mogul, producer, creative type. And I think every White Stripes album is great. I'm going to throw them in legendary, but they could maybe even ascend to the absolute best at some point, depending on how their status remains. Imagine Dragons suck. And I was saying that when it wasn't as popular to say. To me, Imagine Dragons... So here's the thing. Imagine Dragons, The Killers, and Panic at the Disco all come from Las Vegas, and they all contain lead singers who are Mormon, and they all suck in exactly the same way. They're overblown, production-heavy, annoying bands. And there you go. That is my tier ranking. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you do, go ahead and check out my podcast where I talk about movies, not music, at mcguff.ins. And check us out on Twitter at MacGuffinPod. Peace.